Okay, this is a very short video just to clarify something and just give you the information just in case it happens. So today's qualifying for the Brazilian Grand Prix was cancelled because of the conditions. They determined it was unsafe, and it's been rescheduled for tomorrow, the Sunday. Now, if it turns out that it's raining for the qualifying session and they can't hold the qualifying session, will there still be a Grand Prix if the conditions permit it come the time of the scheduled Grand Prix start? And the answer is yes, you can still have a grid. And this has all been, guess what? Somebody's already thought of that eventuality and made a regulation. It's incredible, isn't it, that they can think of all the different things that could happen and create a rule and regulation as to how to deal with it. But nobody knows the regulations. Anyway, it's this. Drivers will be considered to be unclassified in the following circumstances. And number one is they got eliminated in Q1. Well, there wasn't a Q1, so that would be applies to them all. Or two, if they failed to set a time in Q1. Well, there wasn't a Q1, so that applies to them all. Okay, so all drivers are currently unclassified because there wasn't a Q1. Okay, then the relative classification of such drivers will be determined as follows. So if you didn't set a time in qualifying, well, qualifying didn't happen, so none did. So then, for the Grand Prix, the classification will be determined as follows: drivers who are unclassified because of conditions, yep, that's all of them, will be allocated the top positions in accordance with the order that they were classified in P3, or in the case of a sprint session, which is this weekend, is scheduled P1. So sprint weekend to normal weekend. Normal weekend of Grand Prix racing, as most people will know and understand, the Friday consists of practice 1 and practice 2. The Saturday consists of practice 3 and qualifying. The Sunday consists of the race. Okay, so in the case of there not being a qualifying session able to be held for a normal Grand Prix weekend, the order of those cars in the third of those 3 practice sessions will be the one that determines the grid. The time set in that, and obviously the fastest time in P3 in the third practice session will be the person that then gets awarded pole position for the Grand Prix. Sprint weekends. The way that the sprint weekend works is on the Friday you have practice 1 followed by sprint qualifying. The Saturday morning you then have the sprint race followed by the qualifying for the Grand Prix, and that's the bit that couldn't take place, and then the Sunday is the Grand Prix. So what it's saying is the grid for the Grand Prix will be determined from the only practice session there actually was, so it's P1. Okay, so that practice session from the Friday will be the grid for the Grand Prix on the Sunday if the qualifying for the Grand Prix is unable to be carried out. So I didn't make that clear. I didn't know that when I was recording that previous video, and so probably speculated a little bit. But rather than speculate, rather than tell you what I think, because that's useless, okay, I'd rather tell you what is. All right, I speculated the notion of, do the teams come to an agreement as to how they arrange the grid in terms of, do they go off the practice times, and if that's what they do and it's not written in the regulations, then it's actually not valid, and should it qualify as a championship event if it doesn't comply with the regulations that determine the championship. However, the regulations do say this, so this is how it would be. The grid would be formed from the times that the drivers achieved in that practice session P1 on the Friday. That would be valid. That is what they have predetermined, hence it makes it valid. And this is what it's all about. If you have rules, you have regulations, you have a set of criteria that you apply to the situation, everybody knows what it is, everybody knows the jeopardy. You know, people are aware beforehand that should there be the situation whereby this happens, qualifying is a washout and we can't actually stage a qualifying session, then what happens is the times will be taken from your P1, in this instance, because it's a sprint week ahead, from your P1 timings. And if everybody's already aware of that, that's what happens. That's what it is. And that's why with all of the sports, you have a set of predefined parameters. That's why we have predefined safety car situations. You can't freestyle them on the move because people need to know what it is they're contesting under. They need to know the parameters. And hence, all eventualities, people with intelligence, okay, sit down, hold meetings, discuss through all the eventualities, and come up with a set of parameters that meet all of those eventualities. And those regulations are written accordingly. And they are looked at and they are checked time and time and time again, tested. Real life conditions, they are put to the test under real life condition. And if a situation arises which isn't covered, then these are amended so that they do cover it. That is the evolution of sporting rules and sporting regulations to ensure that ultimately they achieve covering all eventualities in the sport. Occasionally, things that have never been thought of will occur, and then you have to devise how to deal with it, okay? But they try to make sure that they've covered all the bases. That's, again, this happens in every sport. Abu Dhabi 2021 wasn't them situations. It was not one of those situations. There were clear parameters, the safety car regulations already existed, the notion of race director's overriding authority did not apply in terms of him being able to freestyle regulations in any way. The regulations are there for a purpose, and they are to ensure that prior to the resumption of racing, after a safety car has been deployed to intervene in a race on the grounds of safety, to ensure that the incident can be cleared up and that the track is safe in order to actually race on. Prior to the resumption of any racing, in those circumstances, you must have to carry out these regulations to restore sporting fairness to all competitors, and hence that regulation is written. In races where they've not gone on long enough for the leaders to start lapping the back markers, or the performance differential between the first and last car is not such that the first car is that much faster than the last car that they can make it around the track and start lapping, okay? All that happens is when that safety car is deployed, the leader is held by the safety car and everybody ultimately catches it, and you naturally form that safety car snake of all the competitors bunched up one behind the other in the correct race order. In races where the leader has begun lapping those competitors, then the regulation to restore that same condition of having the first competitor lined behind the safety car and all of the remaining competitors lined up behind him in the correct race order with all of those previously built up advantages wiped out between everybody, you must carry out that procedure of releasing the lapped cars and affording them at least one further lap of the safety car with which to attempt to catch the back of the pack, and that is the only condition in which that race can be restarted. Clear parameters already listed in the regulations. They're not up for argument, and yet the sport ignored that to create a one-lap shootout between just two cars. One of those cars, it knew, everybody knew, was significantly advantaged. And that is breaking the rules of the sport to fix a race in the favour of Red Bull, who then went on into a steward's appeal where Mercedes appealed to the governing body of the sport to say to the governing body of the sport, you have broken your rules. And the governing body of the sport invited Red Bull into that appeal to ask Red Bull what Red Bull thought, and asked Red Bull what Red Bull thought the rules were. And Red Bull suggested an entirely different interpretation of these rules that had never been suggested since the reintroduction of this regulation right at the beginning of the 2012 season. The 10th full season of these regulations being in operation. The 199th Grand Prix contested under these regulations since the beginning of the 2012 season. And who has told you that? If you've not heard it on this channel, you haven't heard it elsewhere, have you? You might not have seen them videos on this channel if you've only just joined this channel, if you've only just subscribed. You probably haven't seen that content. I've put that out best part of 2 years ago. Why have you never heard it elsewhere? You've not heard it elsewhere is because none of the world's media is revealing that. None of the so-called journalists in this world actually perform the role of somebody that is giving you useful, accurate, researched information that exposes the reality of the situation. They are just parroting the narrative that the ultimate perpetrators of this want the people of this world to believe. Told you it was going to be a short one. It's dragged on for longer than I anticipated, but I have to keep telling everybody this is a situation. This is a situation. So, please can you share this content? As I say, YouTube are not going to recommend this content to very many people, and therefore people won't be exposed to it. People will not understand. All they'll be exposed to is the narrative that this sport wants to give them. I'm telling the truth. I'm backing that truth up with the evidence. This is the regulation. This is what will happen on Sunday if the actual qualifying, the reschedule qualifying cannot take place. This is the regulation that determines what the grid for the Grand Prix will be if the Grand Prix can take place. Remember, as I've said before, if it's a wet conditions for the Grand Prix, then the Grand Prix can only be deemed to have started from the point in time where if they parade behind the safety car, okay, the Grand Prix can only be deemed to have been started from the moment that the safety car peels into the pits and that lead car crosses that line for the first time with the safety car having departed the track. Up until that point, nobody's racing. Nobody's allowed to overtake anybody, and therefore it's not a race. All you're doing is following the leader in a parade. That's not a race. So do not let Brundle and Crofty lie to you tomorrow if that's what happens, saying, oh, and officially we're now underway, like they did in Belgium 2021. And if you don't believe me, go and get a recording of that race. It's available on F1 TV. Go and watch the Belgian parade again. 2021 Belgian parade. Brundle and Crofty are lying when they're parading behind the safety car, saying, oh, and we're officially now underway. This Grand Prix has now started. An absolute lie. Thank you for your time.